You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 76.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Vias.
Now, this is kind of a taboo subject for me. And although being sexy might be talked about quite a bit in the media and things like that, I think it's a little taboo to talk about it in terms of yourself and the fact that a lot of us want to be sexy. And that's why it's taboo for me. I want to be sexy. And that has taken me a long time to admit to myself and then to even share this with you in this episode. Now, when we talk about being sexy, it's kind of really difficult because everyone has a different definition, don't they? A lot of us can attribute being sexy to physical features, and we've been influenced by the media in terms of what is sexy in terms of physical attributes, like lighter skin has been kind of how society has been influenced from Western culture throughout, that having lighter skin is considered sexy. And now I think that that's changing, actually. But things like that, we've been influenced by this definition. So then it becomes, well, what is sexy? And then we go about trying to define it because we so badly want it for ourselves. And then we so badly try to obtain it. And the ways that we go about obtaining it sometimes is buying a lot of beauty products and things like that. And we've even gone so far to define sexy in terms of characteristics that a person has, one of them being if a person is self-confident, they come across as being sexy. And I kind of want to drop all of that because that is about other people. Other people have definitions, and trying to be sexy for everybody else, it's not really going to work. So we all kind of intellectually know that everybody has a different definition. And if we really think about it, not everyone's going to find us sexy, but yet we want it. We want other people to desire us because that's what sexy, when it comes down to, is why do you want to be sexy? Is that you want people to desire you. And that could be in anything. And I'm not just talking about in romantic relationships. It could even be in friendships. You want to attract friends. It could even be with your parents, the desire for them to be with you, to pay attention to you. So I'm going to move closer to sexy by looking at that desire, the fact that we want to be desired by other people in our lives. And so how do we move closer to sexy? You know, I'm always going to give you the short answer up front. It's to stop berating yourself. So when you berate yourself, and I mean even when you do it inside your head and you don't think anybody knows that you're berating yourself, people know that you're berating yourself because eventually it comes out as an action that somebody sees. It could be a nonverbal, it could be something you say and you don't even realize you say it, and it's berating yourself. And berating yourself is basically saying you don't want you. You don't desire you. You don't desire yourself. I want you to really think about that. Whenever you berate yourself, you're not wanting you. You're only actually wanting the good parts of you. So whenever you think that you've done something bad or made a mistake or failed at something, you're only trying to desire, quote unquote, what you think are the good parts of you. And you want to reject the quote unquote, the bad parts of you. So you don't want you in its totality, in its wholeness. And I know that you know this, and I'm going to say it again. When you don't desire yourself, nobody else is going to desire you. And if you've ever seen this, and I think they do this really kind of very overtly in a lot of TV programs and stories and things like that, is that someone often becomes desirable when other people are desiring that person. And the same is true when you want you. You actually become that person that says, I'm desirable. And then other people are like, oh, you're desirable. And that's kind of how it works. And so the fundamental way that we communicate our undesirability is when we berate ourselves. And even when we berate ourselves inside our heads, we don't realize it, but it comes across as actions towards other people in the words that we choose to say to them. It might even be a nonverbal. And it communicates our own undesirability with ourselves. And then the other people around us are going to follow suit. Okay, I find myself undesirable. Other people are going to take that cue and be like, oh yeah, you are in fact maybe not so desirable. So when you stop berating yourself, you actually are moving closer to desiring yourself and moving closer to being sexy. So I recently saw this happen, somebody else berating themselves, and it's a lot easier to actually see it when somebody else is doing it than rather look at your own behaviors. And this is how I think most of us berate ourselves, and it becomes an action that somebody else sees. So I had requested a video clip to be finished from somebody I was working with by a certain date and time. And he didn't do it. So I followed up with him and I was talking to him, and then he told me he forgot. And he started berating himself. He started telling me, oh, I should have done this, and I followed through my commitment, and, apologizing and all these kind of things. And so that's one of the ways that we do that. We are very sorry for making a mistake. And we can be sorry, and we cannot berate ourselves. And we tend to over-explain. And this is something that I've done. And when I saw it in this, and actually, I find him a very physically attractive person. And when he started doing this, I was turned off. I was like, okay, it's really not that big of a deal. I can get a video clip from somewhere else. It didn't really disrupt my whole agenda. And that was what was going on in my head. But yet here I was, talking to him, and he went on and on about this mistake that he had made. That wasn't that big of a deal to me. And so that's kind of how we see it. And so one of the things that I started to realize in myself is how many times, and I kind of did this after the fact because it kind of is hard to catch yourself in real time, but you can move to the real time catching yourself when you can see it after the fact. So I would catch myself with the number of times I would say, I'm sorry, for being human and forgetting things and for being late and things like that, but also what I was saying after it. And what I was saying to the other person about my mistake, and then what I was saying to myself. So I started to catch myself after the fact of whenever I was saying, I'm sorry. And the way that I started to stop berating myself internally so that it wasn't something that happened externally is that I started to write down all of those berating thoughts. Now, I've talked about this before about actually writing things down, but here's something specifically that I do if you're kind of like, okay, yeah, I've heard this, keep a journal or something like that. I actually don't keep a journal when it comes to a lot of negative thoughts about myself. So I have one of those kind of legal pads where you tear the paper off and then you can just easily throw it away. So I actually write out all of my negative thoughts, everything. And I do this, I would say I try to do it daily, but probably it ends up being more like every other day. Whenever I get myself into this kind of place where I'm like saying a lot of negative stuff to myself, I just write out all the sentences. And here's what I do. I pick one sentence from the paragraph I've written, and then I try to prove it wrong with one thing. So here's one of my things. I used to say, and I used to believe that I'm ugly. So that was one of the thoughts that I would write down on a piece of paper. So I picked that thought and I would say, well, is there something that I don't find ugly about myself? Is there something I find pretty about myself? And I would do this until I found one thing. And the first thing I found is that I liked my square shape of my face. And this could be any small thing. It could be your earlobe, your eyebrow, your fingernail, your cuticles, your big toe. Whatever it is, you write down one thing that disproves that statement. And then I throw the piece of paper away. I don't keep a journal. I don't think if you do this daily or every other day, you will see patterns in the common thoughts that you have that berate yourself. And the other thought that I used to kind of have was, I'm a failure. So what I did with that is that I would find one thing in my day or the day before when I would do it in the morning is one thing that was a success. And it could have been I did my grocery shopping that I had on my list that day. I did that. Or I'll give you this thing. Today, you're listening to this podcast and you're focusing on your mental health. I would write down something that I accomplished or finished in that day to counteract. One thing. And you just start there, and you don't have to keep a journal. You don't have to do anything. You need to just write out something on paper, get all the thoughts, pick one, and pick something that contrasts that one thought. That foundation of seeing that pattern will automatically begin to change all of the ways in which you show up in your life, where you're actively berating yourself, where people externally see it. It's when you can focus on getting kind of moving and shifting the berated thoughts that you have in your head and not believing them anymore. Because when you start to stop believing all of these negative thoughts about yourself, the actions will follow. You won't show up around other people in ways that say that you're not desirable, that you're not sexy. And then the rest will follow. That's all I have for you today, and I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.